So why do we need to take action on domestic violence? I have heard this from many people that women are very safe in Canada, and as individuals, we don't need to worry because there are laws and systems to protect them. If you are one of these people, I will like you to consider these stats and they may change your perception. Domestic violence is a major problem in Canada. According to the Canadian Women's Foundation, every 6 days, at least one woman is killed by her partner. 67% of Canadians know at least one woman who has been physically or sexually assaulted. When asked, 55.8% of Ontarians said they wouldn't intervene if they saw domestic violence and suspect uh, was the partner. So it's not just about the violence, it's also about the inaction of the communities, as many people still consider domestic violence a private matter. So uh, the thing is about domestic violence is that it happens across all cultures. The cause of domestic violence is unequal relationships between men and women. But uh, uh, but we need to understand who benefit. But sometimes what we hear is that immigrant cultures are barbaric and it's in certain cultures or religions, and it's because of them that domestic violence happens. What we need to understand is that who benefits from saying that immigrant cultures are barbaric. There is this far right, white supremacist, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic agenda that links certain cultures or religions with domestic violence. The data I shared before clearly demonstrates that domestic violence is pervasive in Canada across all cultures and communities and is not limited to certain communities. So if it is pervasive in all communities or present in all communities, why are we focusing immigrant and newcomer communities? We are doing this because immigrant and refugee women who experience domestic violence face particular barriers in accessing care and services. That's the purpose. And I will speak about this campaign and what its goals are, but first I will like to invite our first speaker, Dinoba, who works, as I told you, with the CASA. Dinoba, please start your presentation and share your slides.
Thank you, Fazia. I'm just going to quickly share my slide here. Are you able to see my slides?
No, I think I will have to stop sharing mine first and probably, yeah, now I can say it.
Excellent. So I'm just going to make this a full screen. Okay. Excellent. And pulling out my presentation here. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Dinoba. As Fazia has just said, I work with the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians, and I'm currently leading a national project on.
I can't hear you, Dinoba.
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
I think I was on.
Yeah.
It's good now?
Good.
Okay. So let me try again. So my name is Dinoba. I currently work with the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians, and I'm currently leading a research study, a national one, on specifically South Asian, the gender-based violence that the South Asian community is facing, and the ways in which it has manifested specifically during the pandemic, because it has taken different forms, and issues that exacerbate the violence specifically within our community, which may vary from other communities and the violence that other communities face. Um, so that's kind of what we're looking into. Mainly so far during the data collection phase, we have done a lot of focus groups with women who have experienced gender-based violence. And it's something that, especially within the South Asian community, I feel people are very hush-hush about it. It's looked down upon to even share the issues that you have in your family. So I really commend the women who have come out and shared their stories. And I've also had the privilege to be able to speak with a lot of executive directors of agencies that are helping these women as well, and the ways in which the agencies have had to shift their practices during the pandemic. So we're still in the preliminary finding stage, but I wanted to share a few of the things that we have come across, some of which Fawzia has just touched on as well. So let me see if I can do the next slide here. Yeah. So these are the topics that we will be discussing today. The first one is, why did GBV specifically spike during the pandemic? The forms of GBV and awareness component of that. And then, is GBV a cultural norm for South Asians? Because as Fawzia has said, there is this narrative around, oh, the stereotypes of this is just how South Asians are, that's their culture, abuse is normal. And then systems, what are the systems that are enabling GBV within Canada? Because there are systems that are enabling that. And the final one is, what are the South Asian agencies that you can seek help with? Some specifically for legal issues, some for counseling and other issues that you may face. So the first topic I wanted to touch on is, what are the forms of GBV? So number one, a lot of women think that the ways in which they are unhappy in their household, in their marriage, can be normal. It is normalized in various ways, and a lot of it has to even be being unaware of some of the forms that, oh, this is actually abuse, because we know physical abuse, it's very blatant, but what are the other forms of abuse that take place? And so that's the other thing, is that many of the abusers themselves, especially when it comes to women who have immigrated into the country, are far less aware of the resources available. They may not know the language and not have the network that the abuser does. Specifically, if you don't know the language, your abuser is your access and your portal to the knowledge and networks that are here, which is very problematic because they're not going to tell you that what they are. So that's an issue. And the other one, so let's get into what the actual forms of GBV are. So mental abuse, it can come down to anything like constant put downs from your partner. A big one is threats of deportation, which is a specific one that immigrant communities are facing. So a lot of South Asian households are facing this. Threats and manipulation of deportation if the woman doesn't have PR status. And threats of losing their children because you aren't a good mother. Again, going back to the idea that the abuser holds all of the power in that way, or the knowledge or the language skills. The other one is financial abuse. A lot of that is not often recognized as abuse. Some women aren't allowed to have their own bank accounts. Some of the women that we've spoken to. Some of the women have shared that until they left their home, just even
Right.
something as simple as knowing what is the price of food that we take for granted is something they didn't know. And also this, yeah, so isolation is another big one that can go under mental abuse, but it is a common tactic that the abusers are facing. Is everyone able to hear me? Is it okay?
I lost you for a little bit, but then you came back.
Okay, okay. So, and then the final one is physical abuse, the most commonly recognized one. Unfortunately, the executive directors of the legal agencies I've spoken to, they said there's two specifically serving South Asians, which I will get mention at the end of the presentation. And they had said that by the time that they see their clients, a lot of them are referred to by hospitals and police because the abuse has gotten so bad that they are now physically abused, that they are in hospitals now. So that is when it's recognized, and they're forced to kind of see an agency if they want to. And so, and even then, 50 to 60% according to some of the directors, they said 50 to 60% still do want to reconcile with their abusers after seeing these agencies and looking for help. And of course, family, children, all of that plays into it. Maybe not being able to have their own income. There's a variety of issues, but the agencies at that point make sure they have a safe exit plan if that is what it comes down to, and to know what all of their options are. So there is no judgment if they choose to go back to their family. So if ever that is an issue, I hope women are open about going and seeing an agency for help if they're able to leave their home. So undercutting all of this is control, and that is what abuse looks like. Yeah. So the next point here that I wanted to speak about are oh, before I get into that, this I did not put into the slide, but there are two main barriers that we have seen with the South Asian women is, again, as I mentioned, language is a huge barrier. If you don't know the English language, you may not be able to go out and find services that help you, or you might, sorry, I think I hear someone's audio, maybe mute that. So you might not be able to seek services, you might not be able to know what's out there. Even a simple Google will be difficult in that case. The other barrier is during the pandemic, everything has gone virtual, and the technological limitations has also been overlapped with the language limitations, has been very difficult for a lot of the clients that have sought help. But again, these agencies have been really great in connecting women with training and teaching them how to navigate the online world, and many of them are doing really well with that now. Yeah, so the two kind of points that I wanted to touch on are, is GBV a cultural issue in the South Asian world, and and also what are the systems that have enabled GBV? So the first one is cultural norm. So a lot of people, again, like Fawzia was saying that barbaric cultures, this is just what they are. Women aren't treated as equals. But the truth is that it is not a cultural norm. It is a global reality. Gender-based violence is a global reality, and it manifests differently in different countries, in different legal systems that enable this, in different issues. A lot of South Asians here are, there are certain systems that are enabling GBV in a way that maybe they would not have had to deal with, such as deportation if they were back home. And that is in itself being exploited by abusers. So it is not a cultural norm, it is a global reality, and patriarchy and misogyny are to speak to this, and that comes through the form of control, and that is what a lot of all these cultures are dealing with. The numbers that Fawzia had said earlier, that is a Canadian stat, and it does not speak only to South Asian cultures, or other cultures, but Canadians here who have been raised here are dealing with that. So it is about patriarchy and control, and an imbalance of power is what all that is. And any of the reasons that I said above, language or technology or not having the network, imbalance of power leads to this sort of situation. And the other one is laws and systems that are also in place to enable GBV. So one of the main issues is sponsorship agreements. A lot of South Asians are here through a sponsorship agreement. Their husband may have sponsored them, and it's they're to be supported for 3 years by their partner, their sponsor, and then it takes another 3 to 4 years to be able to process this application. So this couple now needs to lead a happy marriage and show that this is a real happy marriage for that entire time. But let me ask you something. How many of you know couples who have met each other, gotten married, and divorced before 3 years? That's many of us do. So why is it that the reality of sponsored couples are at a different level? The expectations are very high compared to the couples in Canada who do not need to deal with immigration. The reality just doesn't work that way. it's almost as though one of the EDs that I had spoken to said it seems like there's a philosophy in Canadian laws that structured around indebtedness to the sponsor by the sponsored one. And that is problematic, especially when there is abuse. So that is a huge one, a system that is throwing these sponsored women under the bus. And one more thing that I do want to clarify that a lot of abusers use to threaten the women, and if you know anyone who believes this, do pass the information on. But I spoke with the legal directors, and they had said that more often than not, almost very, very rarely can a woman be deported after having been here and gone through an abusive marriage. Very, very rarely can she be deported. It is the Canadian Border Services and IRCC who does the deporting. It has nothing to do with the will of the husband. And, maybe at the very beginning, if there is some sort of thing before she comes or as she's here, where they can say, oh, I've been frauded. But otherwise, it's a very rare situation where they can be deported. And so, yeah, so maybe false refugee claimants, criminals, those are kind of their priorities to deport. But these women do end up being here without PR regardless. Their status is precarious still. And they might be here for years and years without any status. But they would be able to, sorry, I'm hearing some.
제니퍼리나 یه چیز برای
Sorry, I think somebody here is unmuted. I'm not sure who that is. But either way, so it can, so those are the situations. And but these women can make a case for themselves if they've been living here for years and years without status, that, hey, like, I've been here for a long time. And also legally, maybe a lawyer can help you apply for the humanitarian and compassion application to be able to get PR if all of your sponsorship and all of that falls through. So there are different ways we can work the system in support of your situation, especially if you have been in an abusive relationship. So I do want to kind of, before I wrap up, I do want to say what sorts of resources there are specifically targeting and for South Asian women or a South Asian community. So the first, the two legal ones, and they are specifically targeting any sort of legal cases, is the South Asian Legal Clinic of Ontario and the Barbara Schleifler Clinic. They have in-house lawyers and they can provide services for free. And then we have other community organizations as well. Any of these ones listed here for Ontario. We have ones in Alberta and British Columbia, many of who are partners with CASA right now, who I'm working with, and shelters who are willing to take South Asian women and generally women as well. And some of them also serve food that is particular to South Asian culture, just so it's not too overwhelming being, starting your life over again. And many of them are also helping with accessing mobiles. They allow you to, help you with resumes, job finding, so many different steps. But it's about making that first call to be able to start your life again. And even if you do want to go back to your household, finding ways to make plans that are safe for you and your children. So these are available. The last thing I will say before I end this is that in South Asia, there aren't free services of this sort available. It's not a common thing. So when women are here struggling through this, they don't even know this exists here. And in this way, Canada has been good and helpful for these situations. So do spread the word. Do have men on your side who spread the word. That is very important to have men allies. And you are not alone, and do seek the help if you need. Thank you for listening, and this is my email if you need to contact me later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dinoba, for this very comprehensive presentation. I'm sure our participants would have many questions, but I will like to hold you those questions and I will, until all the presentations are done, I will invite, next up is Kiran. Kiran, as I introduced before, is a tech worker, writer, artist, and podcaster based in Toronto. She was born and raised in Pakistan, and she has been working with the Committee of Progressive Pakistani Canadians for 4 years. And she has worked on several campaigns to promote gender equity, peace, secularism, and socialism in Canada and around the world. Kiran, over to you.
Thank you, Fawzia. Well, I guess we don't need to have a panel anymore. I think we understand what women face when we talk about gender-based violence. Okay, so thank you, Fawzia and Denoba. And we're not going to let people who have nothing better to do take over our presentation. So I'm going to continue. I was brought in because I have worked with the Committee of Progressive Pakistani Canadians for a few years, and I've also been doing work with various other organizations from in Canada, in Pakistan, in all kinds of places to increase the awareness of issues around gender-based violence, sexual assault, domestic abuse, things like that. Some of the things that Denoba talked about and that Fawzia has talked about. My perspective on this is that there are some amazing organizations like CASA and others that are doing this work, that are collecting research and providing all kinds of information and strategies and resources to people who are working with people who face gender-based violence. And at the same time, it's really important for us to remember the human stories, the individual stories that each of those cases makes up, right? And the multiple lives that are affected for each case we might hear about. So these are not just statistics, they're people who are affected by abuse, violence, whether it's even verbal abuse, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, as well as physical abuse, or even cyber abuse, as we see here today. But also financial abuse, which is a particular topic that I'm interested in. Growing up in Pakistan, which is where I was born and raised for the first few years of my life, I faced domestic abuse at the hands of my father, and who was abusive towards my mother and me and my siblings. I also faced sexual abuse from various men, both people that were known to my family. Some people, they didn't know what was happening at the time, but also strangers on the streets. You would walk by and people would, being an 11, 12-year-old girl, you would still get, I would still get harassed and even touched and molested on streets, in public and stores and public transit all the time. It was very common. I didn't even know what was happening at the time. Because there was also no sex education. So that ties into the idea that this idea that we need to keep people, especially younger people or young adults, keep them away from sex ed, which is also another patriarchal idea that a lot of people in the South Asian diaspora have, that actually protects abusers, because a lot of people don't know they're being abused, when these things are being done to them. I've also seen a financial abuse and immigration abuse in my own family. And like my mother wasn't able to leave my father because she didn't have a career. and she also was tied to him because of immigration when we came to North America. And that was one of the reasons that we continued to face a lot of abuse for several years. And so my story is just one story, and I have since then come, a far away from where I started. And I have a lot of people to thank for that. But part of my motivation for doing the work that I do, which is like Fawzia said, I worked on all kinds of campaigns on gender, as well as on things like secularism, socialism, economic justice, LGBT rights. All of that, comes from a personal place as well. There's definitely a passion to try to right the wrongs that I saw growing up. And so, it doesn't mean that you have to have come from a place like that to work in this area. I don't think that's necessary. But if you do come from that place, sometimes it can help to help others to, especially if you've come out of that. I find that there is this, actually, while I was preparing for this panel today, I was speaking with my partner about how difficult actually this is to talk about, even though I'm not ashamed of what happened to me or what I experienced. I know I'm not at fault. The people who did those things are at fault. So even if a lot of people who are experiencing abuse really do blame themselves, they somehow find a way to internalize that abuse. And it can take a long time to come out of it. Some people maybe never do. But even when you do come out of it, there's still this the scars that are left. So it's still difficult to talk about. But I felt that it was important to personalize the discussion that we're having today, and not just talk about statistics and surveys, which are very important. I'm not downplaying that, but to put a human face to some of those numbers, and to show that you can survive out of that. You can come out of that, and you can then turn around and help some people who might be in situations that are similar, which I have tried to do, and I am nowhere near a saint or anything like that, but I'm just saying that it has helped me to do those things. And part of my activism is based on that, and I realize that. And at the same time, I want to speak to people who might be going through some of these kinds of abuses, or who might have, and they might be in a place where they're, traumatized, or for whatever reason, afraid to talk about it. It's okay if you feel that you want to talk about it. It is a good idea to talk about it. There are people who are our allies in organizations like Immigrant Women's Information Network and CASA and other organizations for South Asians, as well as general, and other organizations. We need to ally with social activists and people who are trying to approach this, from a legal and sociological point of view. And, we need to bring our voices. And I think the strongest approach is to combine the sort of academic approach with that personal approach, and show that these are real things that people are facing. South Asians, I have in my notes that, there are a lot of, those of us who are from South Asia, I know, can attest to how much patriarchy is baked into our cultures. So we have stigma that, women, especially women, but also others, but especially women, are still facing. And that could be over things like what you look like, what your skin color is. There's a lot of colorism. There could be about stigmas around your weight. There could be stigmas around your, interests, if you want to work or don't work, if you want to have kids or don't want to have kids, if you are gay or bi or trans. And yes, there's definitely, as our friend is saying in the chat, there are definitely similar issues in the Latinx community, and many other cultures, and in the sort of white European Western culture. I'm not going to say that there aren't, but what I'm saying is, as Dinoba also said, patriarchy and as kind of gender-based abuse is universal. It is found in every culture, especially those that have been touched by colonialism and capitalism. And as somebody who studies socialism, and especially the work of like Frederick Engels and Alexander Kollontai, I do know that there's a connection between capitalism, which continues to basically use women's labor for free in order to subsidize the work that, that men do, and that nowadays also uses women as laborers in the workplace as well, right? So there is a whole history, and I don't want to get into all of that, but there is definitely a connection between capitalism and patriarchy. There's no doubt in my mind about that. So those cultures that are touched by capitalism tend to have this sharp divide and these sharp gender inequalities and abuse and things like that. So I guess I'm just going to end. I won't take too much time, but I just wanted to say that survivors, as well as social activists and social workers, both need to work together on this, and there needs to be an understanding of maybe survivors do have a hard time talking about this stuff, but at the same time, they can still contribute, and they can bring that sort of motivation to right some of the wrongs, and instead of internalizing it, or there's all kinds of ways that trauma shows up, right? So trauma could show up as some kind of depression or addiction, or some people pass the trauma on, right? So a lot of abusers are actually people who were abused themselves in some way. And so it is important that we try to direct it in some constructive way. As well, for people who are researchers and academics, it is important, as I think our host Fawzia and other people here understand, to be very sensitive to the trauma, to the fact that we are talking about personal trauma. So I'll end there, and I'll be happy to discuss and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing these very personal experiences, which I'm sure are not easy. And I'll also like to apologize to all of the participants about this invasion of our meeting and those very offensive images which you had to see. My sincere apologies for that. And now I will go back to the presentation which I was doing before, which is again about this OCASI, a campaign, Immigrant Newcomer Communities, Neighbors, Friends, and Families campaign. There are a few more things. Some of the things have already been covered by Dinuba in her presentation, so I will not talk about the things which she has already covered, but there are a few more things which I will like to share with you. And as I said, this campaign raises awareness about unique barriers which immigrant and newcomer women face when they face violence in Canada. And the campaign advocates for the elimination of those barriers. I'm not going to talk about the next few slides because Genova has already covered them, but the idea was for people to know what different types of violence are and how to identify them. But because Genova has already talked about them, so I'm not going to discuss them, but I'm showing you my slides just in case you want to know a bit more about it. And in terms of financial violence, I wanted to say one thing. There is one very particular type of violence which is specific to South Asian community, and that's like women don't get a share in family wealth, usually including property. So that's probably particular to South Asian community. That's why I wanted to highlight it. And another type of abuse, which is not mentioned on these slides, is very common in South Asian community, is inequality in housework. South Asian men, they usually don't do any housework, and culturally it's not considered appropriate for them to do it. It's a type of physical and emotional abuse. South Asian women carry the double burden of working outside of the house, and when they come back, they have to do another full shift of work where they cook, clean, wash, and meet children's physical and emotional needs. They work themselves into illness and even death, while South Asian men, they spend their time chatting with their friends or on their social media apps or sleeping or watching TV. So when we talk about these different types of violence and abuse, I think we should keep this in mind as well. The main focus of this campaign, as I earlier said, is to be able to identify high risk warning signs so that if you see someone who is going through violence, you are able to support them. So some of the high risk violence, high risk signs are obsessive behavior, any action or actions by the perpetrator that indicate an intense occupation with the victim, that's a warning sign of a high risk situation. Actual or pending separation, if the perpetrator is separated from the victim but wants to renew the relationship, that's also a high risk sign. History of past domestic violence, if the perpetrator has a history of violence, even if it did not result in charges, it could be as simple as the neighbors hearing the perpetrator screaming at the victim. So that can be a warning sign too. And if you see any of these signs, I think you should try to support the person. Depression, if the perpetrator displays symptoms or characteristics of depression, uh, that's a warning sign too. And prior threats or attempts to commit suicide, that's a warning sign. If the victim discloses to anyone by saying that I fear for my life, I think he will hurt me, I need to protect my children, these are the things which people should take seriously, and they should try to seek support for this person. So these are some of the really important signs, and in most of the cases of violence in Ontario, 73% in 73% of the cases, 7 out of these 10 risk factors were present. So that's why it's really important for you to know them and be able to take action when you see them. And also, while we are talking about these signs of high risk situations, I will also like to talk about the particular barriers which immigrant women face, although Dinova has talked about them, but I will just briefly touch upon them, and then we will open the floor for questions. Social isolation, when immigrant women, when they first arrive in Canada, they are socially isolated, and that's why Immigrant Women's Information Network, it not only wants to enable women to be successfully settled in Canada, but also have them social networks. Language barrier, a lot of women, when they first come to Canada, they are not fluent in official languages, English and French. So again, that can also become a barrier. Uh, Immigration status, I think Dinoba has talked about it quite in detail, especially women with precarious status like refugee women, undocumented women, they don't access supports and services because they fear deportation. Racism and discrimination, that's also another reason why women don't access mainstream services, because they fear that they will be, if being a woman of color or an immigrant woman, they can be discriminated, or their entire cultures can be blamed for their situation. And economic exclusion, of course, a lot of women have dependence on their perpetrators. That's why. So if you are in need of help, or you know someone who needs help and is hesitant to seek it, remember that you are not alone. There are resources in the community that can support you. Abuse is not a private matter. Violence affects the whole community, and it takes a whole community to respond to it. There are resources available in the community, including resources for the person who is doing the violence or abuse. So always keep that in mind. Dinova has introduced some resources, but I will also like to remind you that Immigrant Women's Information Network provides culturally and linguistically appropriate information, resources, and referrals to South Asian women who face gender-based violence. You can reach out to us at any time, but if it's a crisis situation, you can call either 911 or the Assaulted Women's Helpline. You can also find a safe place to live by going to this website, sheltersafe.ca. And after this, at this, I will close my presentation and uh, we will open the floor for questions, but we are also posting a link in the chat. We will really like to receive your feedback. It's really important to us and it will help us improve our work. And you can click the link in the chat and do the evaluation of this event. You can do it either during the Q&A session or you can do it afterwards. But if you click the link, it will stay in your browser. So please do click the link. It's really important for us. And with this, I will open the floor. If you have any question, you can open your mic, but I will request for people not to start speaking at the same time. Yeah, please go ahead, Magdalene.
Hi, I have a question for the panel, and because I don't know if I understood or misunderstood. At the very beginning, when there was a comment made in terms of campaigns that are focused on specific communities, and that this is a global issue, which I totally agree. It is a global issue. It's not specific to a community, as a economic sector or anything. Like it is prevalent in globally. So I am part of the violence prevention table in Peel, and we have done some campaigns that have I guess focus on communities, with the idea of reaching to those communities to share the information and raise awareness. So I'm just, and I want to be very cognizant and respectful, of our diversity, and not to focus on communities because we think that those communities are where violence is prevalent necessarily. So I'm just, my question is, how do we go about all of these campaigns of raising awareness, opening up spaces for people to be able to share experiences and to learn from each other and to support each other in a way that is respectful of the diversity in our communities? So what would be suggested that is the most respectful way of moving forward? Because yeah, I would want to honor people's realities and backgrounds and so on.
I can take this question if no one else wants to go ahead in the panel.
I'll make a comment after you. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Fazia.
Okay, so I will be very brief, and I would say that Peel is we all know that Peel is a very, very diverse region, and there are some great organizations working in Peel region, and I'm sure you are familiar with their work. So probably the first step would be to invite those organizations and having their representation. So having direct representation of the women, especially those organizations which represent survivors, I think that can be one of the first steps towards us. Kiran, please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say something very much along the same lines. Having speakers or people on panels from who do represent different communities. Personally, I don't think representation is something that should be commodified. It's not about like having like different races be cops or something like that. But on something like this, which is a sensitive issue, it is important to have representation when you are doing anything that is bringing up that issue. And also language issue as well. For some people, their language, they might be more comfortable in, speaking their own language. But also, even if, let's say, you are doing a presentation yourself and you do want to acknowledge that it also depends on your positionality, who you are. Like if you are a South Asian woman, but you're talking about your culture and you also talk about, how this the same kind of attitudes can be found in various places and cultures around the world. It is important to be mindful of making sure that your presentation, your approach is universal in its scope, so that you're not, like you said, Magdalena, to say, that obviously it is okay, I think, to focus on your own culture. I think that's actually quite a good idea. But I think it's okay to also talk to people who are from other places, as long as they are activists or survivors who are working in those areas, to ally together and to not single anybody out, and make sure that we acknowledge that this kind of stuff happens everywhere. And what are some of the root causes, like patriarchy, colonialism, capitalism, and all of those things, so that it doesn't become like, a cultural stigma or essentialism or anything like that.
If I could jump in as well, while we were doing the focus groups for our data collection phase, women used that time to really just have a moment of sisterhood, to be able to vent their stories, and to be able to recognize, oh, other people have gone through the same, and to have a moment of humor amongst all that difficulty. And so even providing spaces for that would be a really great way to get the conversation flowing from the ground up. I think that is so important, to be able to not only work from policy and from top down, but from the ground up, and to be able to provide those spaces, and also be cognizant of, like has been mentioned, language barriers, and to be maybe able to organize around communities. So as long as it doesn't come from a place of this is the community that really needs to deal with it, but rather we are all facing it, and we are holding this event for this community to be able to share, maybe have interpreters, those sorts of things is very supportive, and it can come up with some really good outcomes. So that would be great.
Any other questions? Please raise your hand if you have a question. Farah, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yes, I just did. Thank you so much for the presentations. My question is that how do we think that gender-based violence in South Asian communities is almost same as in other communities, more or less? To what degree, like if we want to compare with other immigrant communities, how do we compare that?
I would say, Dinova, if you want to.
Yeah, sure. Well, first I would ask the question of why do you want to, what is the intent behind the question of comparison? What is the motive behind that? And if that's that would be my first question. But secondly, I would look to see, like I had mentioned earlier, if it's a community that already has existed here for centuries, and immigration is not, for example, a facet that impacts their day-to-day life, or if that's not a community that maybe looks for marriage outside of the country, and maybe arranged marriage, as an example, is not a thing. South Asian culture, that is very much a thing that happens often. So those sorts of things, I think, do matter. I think I would also look into how addictions play into the community as well, and how that impacts marriage and households as well. In the South Asian community, drinking is a big addiction that does take place, and so that impacts households. And so maybe looking into other communities and how those sorts of traits or facets play out and impact abuse. That's how I would go about that. But there's just so many different parts to look into, immigration, or how livelihoods are led here, those sorts of things. Not sure if I answered your question, but just some things to look into.
Thank you, Dinova. Yeah, you did. I will briefly explain why I asked this question when you said that what is the motive behind that. The motive is that because I also belong to South Asian community, and the community that you move in, you interact with people more in that community, and then you are more aware of their realities as compared to other communities, right? So sometimes it feels as if this is the worst, right? That this is the worst is happening in our community, and others are probably doing better. So it's always good to know, especially on this very important issue of gender-based violence, that how women are surviving, how they're handling the same issue in other communities.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I would think that also there's just so many elements that can be studied and looked into on a macro scale, which is kind of what we're studying. But just to look at how maybe masculinity plays into that culture, maybe looking at, and so something like the pandemic has really taken a toll on men who can no longer be breadwinners. That's just one example, but there's just so many ways, and maybe different cultures, maybe that's less of a thing. And just so many elements you can study. But I understand when you're knee deep in one culture, you think this is the worst. I get how that comes about. But I think abuse can look different in different ways as well. Maybe it's not physical abuse in another community, but something else that could mean more to them is being controlled. So really, looking from the ground up again, I would say is important.
You're muted, Fawzia.
Any other questions? Okay, Khadim sir, please go ahead.
Oh, I just want to make a comment about Farah's. Sorry.
Okay.
I just want to say that, I grew up in a pretty repressive religious environment in some ways. And for many years, I felt that it was the worst culture because it was personal, because it was where and it was very repressive, sexual, gender repressive, violence, surveillance, no privacy, get married, have babies, that's it. There's no room for anything else. And it is very difficult to see that kind of, to be from there, but also I think maybe what Farah's coming from also is to see that kind of abuse, and not just abuse, but this constant daily oppression, especially I mean, women are being lynched from trees in India. They're being honor killed in Pakistan. And I'm sorry, but there might be other things in some other cultures as well. But when you are from there, it can be daunting to deal with that, so I totally understand the impulse to say ours is worse than everybody else. And it might be that, subjectively anyway, that's true. But we have to, as activists and social workers or researchers, or when we are working on that level, we have to pull people away from that sort of essentialism, because that can also work to divide people, right? It can be like, well, that way we stay divided. We divide the Muslims from the non-Muslims, from the Hindus from the non-Hindus, the Asians from the non-Asians. And it can be a way of making sure that everybody kind of stays in their silos and feels that they're the biggest victim, and it can become like this oppression Olympics thing. So I think that while I totally understand where that impulse comes from, I think it is important for us to take that understanding of our day-to-day struggle and make that connection with the larger struggles that women and men all over the world are facing against patriarchy, against capitalism, colonialism. We need to make that connection. It is up to us to do that. That was my point. Thank you.
Khadim sir, please go ahead with your question.
There is not much time left. I just want to appreciate that these type of intervention should continue. And the key is more and more organization of direct victims and aware women and many others. More you organize, the more we can handle this. That's all I want to say.
No, that's really important. I really appreciate it. Okay. Any other questions? We still have some time. If people have any other questions, please go ahead. Shaheen, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead, open your mic and ask the question.
Oh, hi. Actually, I've already written the question in chat, but I would like to ask even verbally as well. Usually what happens in our surroundings that we see so many people like silently suffering abuse in one way or the other. And usually it goes unnoticed by the person who is suffering, or even if that person realizes, and the notion is that, like, this is what men do in our society, so what can be done about this? It is what it is. So what I feel like, that if we as a community, or like if the sport workers role only starts if the person who is being abused first accepts it and then decides to take a stand for that, or like there's anything which can be done for those people who are just like suffering it because they have to.
Yeah, that's a really important comment, Shaheen. And I think like this is what this Okasi campaign is all about, that people should not suffer in isolation. And even if they don't say, even if they don't come out to you, you should be able to recognize the signs of violence, and especially if it's a high risk situation, and should be able to intervene and also have the resources available for you. Like if you are a bystander, if it's not against you, but you see someone else going through it, you should be able to recognize it and be in a position to support them. And if you want to know more about it, I can send you more information about this campaign. But that's what the whole idea is. And as I earlier said, like there are these organizations, you don't, as an individual, you don't have to take full responsibility of supporting someone. There are organizations which are doing this work and can provide support to you and to those who are facing violence. So you can always refer such cases to Immigrant Women's Information Network or to many other organizations. We have Seema here from Punjabi Community Health Services, which is doing a ton of work in Peel region and in the entire GTA. And there are other organizations which Dinoba mentioned in her presentation, but you can also get that information from us as well. And I will post all of this information on all of our social media platforms, so people can access them anytime they need. Any other questions? Please raise your hand if you have a question and open your mic.
Could we put a link to the Immigrant Women's, I guess, the Facebook page?
Yeah.
I was wondering if it's possible to share the presentations. Thanks, Dinoa, for putting your email down, because I think connections and linking the dialogues and the spaces where we are working to raise awareness and take action around gender-based violence is so important, because the more we connect, the better impact and the broader reach we will have. And hopefully someday we will not have to have these conversations. It just seems incredible to me that we're still having these conversations, because this is such a prevalent thing. Yeah, I would be delighted to be able to continue having the conversation with you, and I know with Kiran I connect often. So thank you for inviting me, Kiran. This is very much an interest for me.
Thank you. If people, yeah, definitely we are going to share these presentations, and they will also be available from our Facebook page, and later on from our website. If people don't have any more questions, then I will close this meeting. And I would like to thank everyone for joining, and to both of our presenters for their great presentations. Again, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, and yeah, get in touch with us. I will again request all of you to please fill out the evaluation form. It's really important for us. It's a Google form. Once you have filled it out, it will reach to us, and it's here in the chat. You can click the link now and it will stay open in your browser.
Great.
I will give 1 minute for everyone to click the link.
I'm also putting my email in case anybody wants to be in touch. KarenPatmapiece@gmail. And I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended. Hopefully we can continue to have these conversations within and among different communities, and actually address some of these issues that sometimes can feel very daunting to talk about. And there's so much other stuff tied into it, you know, identity, racism, discrimination, all of that. So I think it's really important that we have cultivate spaces where we can do this, even and maybe do it in a way that we are, you know, obviously when you're having a public meeting, there's always a danger of some people coming in and doing some stuff that you wouldn't have wanted. But you know, even that we were able to handle it. And I want to say thank you to Fawzia for organizing this too.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks and bye.